Welcome to video number 5 in Microsoft 365 Excel, the complete story. And in this video, we got to talk about date and time, what power, how useful date and time calculations can be, and we'll see Excel formulas and Power Query formulas. Here's just some of the worksheet functions we'll see and some of the Power Query M code functions that we'll see. And as we mentioned earlier when we looked at Power Query M code function names, look at how easy they are to understand. Date.year, month, month name, quarter of a year. And when we see if, in Excel it's capital if as a function, but we'll see in Power Query they use lowercase if. Here's a list of the 12 amazing worksheet date and time formulas we'll see. And we'll also see how to add date attribute fields in the Excel worksheet and Power Query. Now on the sheet dates, we want to talk about date number formatting and date values. Now, we already talked about dates and times back in MECS video number 3. But in this video, we'll definitely talk about them in more detail. Now, as you remember from earlier in the class, when we type a date, date number formatting is applied on top of a serial number date. And that serial number date represents the number of days since December 31st, 1899. So there's always 2 parts to date. Now, here's the keyboard to hard code today's date. And this is very useful when you're entering transactional records. But before we try it, notice Home tab number group, the general number formatting is applied. That general number formatting really means there is no number formatting applied. But as soon as we control semicolon, and right now I can see it's grayed out. But as soon as I enter it, and I'm going to use Control Enter, there's part 1 of dates. That's a date number format applied. Now, if you look up to the formula bar, you cannot see the serial number. We can use one of our best friends in number formatting, the general number format from the dropdown, or we can use the keyboard. You do got to find that grave accent tilde key, but as soon as I Control Shift tilde, there it is, the serial number. Today is exactly 44,803 days since December 31st, 1899. And of course, the genius of having serial numbers under dates is so that we can do date math. We can create date formulas, functions in Excel, Power Query, and the data model. Now, down here is a list of dates with various number formatting applied, and here's the serial numbers. Now, some of the gotchas are if you enter a number before Excel's first date in history, like these dates here, they're text. If you enter a separator that's not allowed, it'll show up as text. And based on your Start menu, regional settings, that's what determines how you enter a date. On my computer, it's month, day, year. So if I enter day, month, it's going to show up as text. Now, another thing that happens sometimes is if we have some date and the column isn't wide enough, it'll show up as a fence or a railroad track. And all it means is, hey, the column isn't wide enough. Now, I want to Control Z to undo, but I think I have to do it 4 times. I'm going to leave it as a date. Now, notice we can display that serial number in many different ways. So next we want to go over and look at the sheet Date NF. Now, on this sheet, I have a column right here. And you can see the date 3/16/2020. But watch what happens when I hit Enter. Every single cell has the same date. I'm just using custom date number formatting to change how the value is displayed. And custom date number formatting is easy. D is day, M is month, Y is year. So up in this top cell, Control 1, number, and down to custom. I'm going to highlight, and watch what happens when I type M. Well, it shows a 3. If I type 2 M's, it'll show me a leading 0. 3 M's, that's the 3-letter abbreviation for month. And 4 gives me the whole name. Now, we already saw MMM when we had to use the DAX function format to create a 3-letter abbreviation for month. Later in this video in the worksheet, we'll have to use the text function and the custom number formatting MMM to create that month abbreviation. And you can play around. 3 Ds will give you the abbreviation for the complete name. Now, year is different because there's only 4 digits. So 1Y and 2Ys show 2 digits, and 3 or 4 shows 4 digits. So you get to mix and match however you would like to display your day. Now on the sheet, date and time formulas. These are the 12 different worksheet formulas we're going to look at for dates and times. Let's start off on formulas 1 to 4. Now, the most basic type of date calculation is difference between 2 dates. For example, how many days until school starts? Well, if this is today and this is when school starts, we have a start and an end. And to calculate the difference between 2 days, you always take later date or end date and subtract earlier date or start date. Now, when you do a subtraction like this, the first day is not included. When you ask how many days until school starts, it's everything after the first date. When I hit Enter, 18 days until school starts. Here's the first date calculation I ever did running my business. How many days is the invoice past due? Those slackers, it was due on the 28th, and they still haven't paid it, and it's on the 1st of March. So we take equals the later date minus the earlier date. And when I hit Enter, 2, yes, that's because this is leap year. And a formula like this understands leap year. And if we come down here, let's do it right here, 2/28/2020, that's leap year. Control Enter. And when I point to the fill handle with my crosshair or angry rabbit, I can click and drag. That will increment dates. And sure enough, there's the 29th. So how many days is it past due? 1, 2. Another common date calculation is how many days was the loan outstanding? Equals later date minus earlier date. When I hit Enter, that loan was outstanding for 120 days. Now, in all 3 examples here, the first day was not included. If you want to include the first day, like when you ask the question, how many days did the project take? Well, we definitely want to include this day. No problem. Equals later date minus the earlier date plus 1. And when I hit Enter, 67 days. And sure enough, I thought it was going to be 66, but there's leap year, so we have a 229 in there. Now let's go, and I'll scroll over a bit. We want to go to our next example, Formula 5. Next, we want to see how to count workdays. And ever since Excel 2010, we've had this amazing function, NETWORKDAys.INTL. Now, we used to have to do crazy complicated formulas in scenarios where weekends and holidays were at odd times. But no more. If we have Friday and Saturday as our non-work days, and we have a start and end date, we use net, and NETWORKDAYS assumes that the weekend is Saturday and Sunday only. So the one we want is .international. We have our start date, and that will be included in the count, comma, and the end date. And when I comma, this is an amazing argument. We can pick any combination from 17 options. We want number 7, Friday and Saturday, tab. That means it's not going to count any Friday and Saturday, comma, and then we have holidays. Now, we can leave that out, but we have holidays, so we're going to put it in. When I close parentheses and Enter, 37 work days between these 2 dates, not counting Friday and Saturday or holidays. Now, if we have a situation like Wednesday and Sunday are going to be our non-work days, that's not one of the 17 options. No problem. We can actually string together as text 7 digits starting at Monday, where 0 means workday and 1 means not a workday. Equals NETWORKDAYS.INTL, start, comma, end, and in weekend, double quotes, Monday, Tuesday we work, Wednesday we don't, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday we don't work. End that off with double quotes, comma, there's our holidays, close parentheses, and when I hit enter, between our start and end, given Wednesday and Sunday are off days and these holidays, we get 40 work days. All right, let's go over to Formula 9 and 10. Now we want to see how to add days to a date to get a future date and subtract days from a date to get a date in the past. Now, when is the loan due? Well, we have the start date, and the loan contract says it's due in 120 days. Well, since dates are really just numbers, all we have to do is add 120. And when I hit enter, 1/3/22 is when that loan is due. Now, this is adding days to a date to get just a date in the future. But what if we want to add 40 days to this date, but we want to exclude days we don't work? Well, we can use an awesome function called not Workday, but Workday.INTL. It's similar to NETWORKDAYS.INTL because it has so many options for weekend. Well, it's going to determine a future date given a start date, comma, and then the number of days into the future. But it's going to skip over, in our case, Fridays and Saturdays. So we'll put 40 in for days, comma, weekend, down to Friday, Saturday, that's 7. We don't have any holidays, close parentheses. And when we hit enter, 3/16/20, that's the end project date for 120 start date and Friday and Saturday non-work days. Now we want to do the reverse of this. What if we know the end date, but we ask the question, when was the loan issued? Well, it was issued 120 days ago, so we just do subtraction. There's the end date. That's when we paid off the loan, minus 120 days, and that tells us the issue date. We're going to do the reverse for work days and a project. We know when the project ended, and we want to know 40 days prior. Well, we use the same Workday.INTL. We have a start date. Well, this is not really a start date, but even though the screen tip says that, this is the end date, comma. But when we put negative days into days, this will give us a day 40 days before this. So minus 40, comma, and our weekend is Friday and Saturday, so 7, close parentheses. And sure enough, that's the start date for the project. So we can take number of days, add and subtract, whether it's just straight days or work days. Now let's go over and look at formula 11 and 12. Now, we're not always just making date calculations. Sometimes we want month calculations. Here's a common question. When does my pension vest? Well, you just signed up for this new job, 122.22, and they tell you you get to participate in the pension plan if you work here for 60 months. Well, we can use the EDATE function. There's the start date, comma, and notice the argument, it wants an increment of months. Now, if I put a minus, it'll go backwards, positive forward, and 0, well, it'll give you that date. So we want 60 months, close parentheses, and when I hit enter, well, January 22nd, 2027 is when your pension will vest. Now, if this happened to be years, then of course here we'd have to put the number of years times 12. Now enter. Another common month calculation is we want the end of the month. And to start off, we're going to ask the question, what is the last day of this month? So if we're currently sitting the 20th day of February in the year 2020, we use the nicely named function EO for end of month. It wants the start date. And again, months, minus will go backwards, but always giving you the end of the month. Positive moves forward, giving you the end of the month, comma. But this is a case where we often use 0. Whatever day it is in this month of February, close parentheses, when I hit enter, it's always going to give us February 29th. Now, we could say 1 month ahead. And of course, now it's March 31st. 1 month backwards, January 31st. We're going to leave it at 0. Now we can also change the date, and notice that number formatting is displaying the year with 2 digits, but when I F2, you can see all 4 digits. Now I'm going to backspace, and let's try 2021. When I enter, well, that February is not leap year, but it gives us the correct end of month. Now Control Z. Now let's scroll over, and we want to look at time calculation. So we're going to go to Formula 7. Now actually, we don't want to go here. Let's right-click the scroll arrows, click on Times, and we'll jump by clicking OK. Now as we learned back in video number 3, when you enter a time value into a cell, it's a 2-step process, just like dates. But in this case, time number formatting is applied. That's step 1, on top of a serial number, that's step 2. And that serial number is the proportion of one 24-hour day. So when you enter 8 a.m., you are not entering the integer or whole number 8. Excel takes the 8 that you enter, divides by 24, 1/3, and the decimal equivalent of 0.33333. And what this tells you is that 8 a.m. is 1/3 of the way through the day. If you enter noon, well, 12 divided by 24 is 0.5. That's the decimal that sits under the number formatting. And that represents 50% of the way through the day. Now, when you enter times, you enter hours, minutes, seconds. If you put AM or PM, those will show up in the cells. If you don't, the number formatting applied is military time. So 1 p.m. would show up as 13. Now let's click in this cell right here, and the number group shows general. That means there's no number formatting. As soon as I type 8:00, and you don't have to put in the seconds, I better put a colon. If I type AM, Control Enter, well, that's text. You have to have either no AM or PM or a space. So when I add a space, Control Enter, sure enough, there's 8 a.m. Now it'll always up in the formula bar show hour, minute, seconds, and then AM or PM. Now if you look up to the number group, it doesn't say time, it says custom. And that just means a custom time number formatting. Now I want to Control ZZ, and let's try 8:00, Control Enter. Now that's military time, but look what happens up in the formula bar. Hour, minute, seconds, and it will always show the AM or PM. Now Control Z, I still see general up here. Here's a great trick for entering times. Let's say you want 8 a.m. Well, you can just put an 8. If I Control Enter, though, Excel treats that as the whole number 8. But F2, if I put a space, and normally you'd have to put 8 a.m., but if you put A, Excel will understand it as AM. P, Excel will understand it as PM. So this is a shortcut for entering times quickly. Control Enter. Whoa, look at that. And up in the formula bar, I can see 8 a.m. Now, what is really in the cell? Well, let's apply general. Remember the keyboard, Control-Shift-tilde. And sure enough, 1/3 of the way through the day. Control Z. If I come down here and make a formula hard coding the numbers 8 divided by 24, Control Enter, I get 0.33. Now I enter historical transactions all the time, and we learned the keyboard for date, that's Control semicolon. But if you want the current time, Control Shift semicolon. So it's easy to remember. Control semicolon is date, add a shift and it's time. Control Shift semicolon. Oh, 2:17 p.m. Control Enter. If we apply general number formatting, we could see that 2:17 p.m., the current time, I am 59% of the way through this day. Control Z. Here's another great trick. Here's what I do at Highline College when I have an academic advising transaction I'm entering into a database. I don't know what day or time it is, but Excel does. Control semicolon. Well, there's the date, space, and then Control Shift semicolon. So we can put date and time. And the reason why is the date part is going to deliver number of days. The time part is going to deliver the proportion of 1 day. So when we Control Enter, we get a date time number with military number formatting applied, but we could see the PM up in the formula bar. But watch what happens when we wipe away the number formatting. Control-Shift-tilde. You're totally allowed to have dates and times together in a cell. And there's lots of worksheet functions and Power Query functions to extract just the date part or just the time part. And in fact, a lot of data sets that have historical records where the time is important, that's how they come. Actually, Control-Z, that's how they come. All right, let's go to time NF. All right, just as for dates, time custom number formatting is easy to remember. H is for hour, M is for minute, S is for seconds. That colon separates each one of them. You can have AM or PM or not. That'll show military time. And there's a square thing that I do not use very often, but I will show you. That's the custom number formatting to show more than 24 hours. Now down here are some examples. The first 4 here are all 130 with various number formatting to display them in a different way. Here's 15 minutes. Here's 15 seconds. And notice if we're doing a proportion of a 24-hour day, those are teeny numbers. Now, I like to use this custom number formatting to display times like this when I'm making a schedule. Here's 2 different ways to show date time values. And down here are examples of using the square brackets. Here I have 24 hours or 1 day, 0.25, 25% of a 24-hour day is 6 a.m. If we didn't use the square brackets, time would only show 6 a.m. But since we use the square brackets, 6 plus 24, 30. Now we want to go over to the sheet Formula 7. So I'm going to come to the scroll arrows, right-click. There's Formula 7. Click OK. Now we want to do time math, payroll time calculations. We have an employee, hourly wage, and the start and end time. Just like dates, when we're doing time calculations, we take whatever the later time is, subtract the earlier time, and that gives us the difference between the two. So equals, and we're going to do it inside of parentheses, later time minus earlier time, close parentheses. And when I Control Enter, one big problem with dealing with times is the formula always sucks the formatting and applies it on the surface. So that's where the keyboard Control-Shift-tilde comes in. Now time in this case is going to be a decimal, and Charday would be really unhappy if the gross pay was some decimal times the hourly wage. That would be less than 1 hour of work. But luckily we know when we entered the times, Excel divided by 24. So F2 to bump it back up, we multiply by 24. And this is annoying. Control Enter. It's still trying to pull that number formatting. So Control-Shift-tilde. We have 5.5 hours work times the hourly wage. We're going to multiply hours times wage. But when I Control Enter, we have some extraneous decimals. So F2. We want to round to the penny. And Enter. Now Charday is much happier. The gross pay is $151.53. Now when you're tracking time, sometimes you have a break, like for lunch. In that case here, we're going to have to make 2 separate calculations. Later time before lunch minus the earlier time. And then after lunch, we have a later and earlier time. Then we have to add both calculations. So in parentheses, this is before lunch, later time minus earlier time. Then we want to add after lunch, later time minus earlier time. Close parentheses. And we want to bump it back up to actual hours. So times 24, Control Enter, Control-Shift-tilde. So we have 8.7 hours worked. Now this is just a single line item for Charday, but we may have multiple employees, or in this case, 5 days where we're tracking time in, time out, and lunch. Well, we're going to spill this. So all the later times for before lunch minus all the earlier times for before lunch, plus after lunch later minus after lunch earlier, close parentheses, times 24. Now when we Control Enter, those calculated hour values spill down the column. Now something important when we're calculating hours, also up here and here, we do not want to round. We need all those decimals to have an accurate time calculation. And that's different than money when we're required to round to the penny. Now we can come down to the bottom, and when we Alt equals to get the auto sum, because it's a dynamic spilled array formula and the formula only lives in the top cell, it got H21, and then the spilled range operator that says get everything that's spilling from H21. When I hit Enter, it looks like Charday worked 37.6 hours. Now if we scroll down, I have the exact same data set, but in this dynamic spilled array, we did not multiply by 24. So let's apply some time number formatting. Control 1, Custom, and in the Type text box, hour, 2 of them. That'll show a leading 0, colon, minute, colon, seconds. When I click OK, all of these are under 24 hours, so they appear correct, 6 hours and 10 minutes. But this is not correct. If we Control Shift tilde, we can see there's 24 hours plus 0.56, which is approximately 14 hours. Control Z, or 1337. And so time number formatting is programmed to show just the decimal number, everything to the right of the decimal. But Control 1, if you want to display it with all the hours past 24, we can put square brackets around the H. When I click OK, now I see 37 hours and 37 minutes. But there's a big difference. Up here, the units are hours. That shows total hours. Down here, the unit is time. We have hours and minutes. They both show 37 hours. But 37 divided by 60, that gives you the part of the hour. So when you have the actual number of hours, that's the number. Now, I don't ever use this number formatting because remember, Control Shift tilde, that's the number underneath. So if I want to take 37 hours and do something like multiply by wage, that's not going to work. Control Z. But that is an option if you want to display it this way. Now let's go over and look at night shift. Now, the problem with night shift is if you leave at 2 a.m., that's 2 a.m. That's a very small number. But if you came in at 8 p.m., that's much further through the 24-hour day. So that's a bigger number. And you're not really allowed to say equals a smaller number, even though that is when they left. So really, that is the end time. But that's a smaller number minus a bigger number, or the start time. Well, you get a railroad track or a fence. And if you hover, look at the screen tip. It says date and times that are negative or too large show as a railroad track. Well, if we Control Shift tilde, you can see sure enough the problem is it's negative. Now, the good news is if we take the distance from 0.76 all the way to 1, that little extra bit, that will give us the time that this person worked. In fact, F2, if you just add 1, remember that's a negative number, and we're going to add it to 1. Control Enter. There it is. That's how many hours they worked. 5 hours and 45 minutes. If we Control Shift tilde, there's the decimal we're after. F2. If we then want to take that decimal and bump it back up to hours, Control Shift tilde, well, there's exactly what we want. 5.75 hours. Then we can multiply it by a wage. But ultimately, the problem is that formula only works on night shift. If you have a bunch of employees and you want one formula which will work on night shift and a non-night shift, then that's going to be trouble. Because if I change this to 10:20 p.m., well, this person's going to be very happy because they worked 2 hours and they got credited with 26 hours. Now, if you want one formula to do both calculations, there's actually 3 well-known formulas. I'm going to show you my favorite. And the ultimate trigger for when to add one or not add one is to ask the question, hey, is the end time less than the start time? In this case, of course, we get true because that's a smaller number than this one. Control Enter. If I change this to 1020, I get a false. Now what we would really like is our formula to add 1 or not add 1. I'm going to Control Z to return that time, F2, and there's a well-known trick for logical formulas. And in fact, about 4 videos ahead, we have a whole video just on logical formulas. But guess what? Any math operation on a true or false will convert true to 1 and false to 0. Now, the trick is you have to either multiply by 1 or divide by 1 or do double negative or something like that, because we have to do the math operation, but we're going to use 1 so it doesn't change the value. Now watch what happens. 1. And if I change this to 10:20 p.m., 0. Control Z, F2. So instead of using that math operator and 1 to not change the value, I'm simply going to make the calculation, which is later time minus earlier time. And then I want to add. And since that's a math operator, when this comes out true, like now, it'll be 1. When I change it to 1020, it'll be 0. So it will just add 0. And then we take that and multiply by 24. Control Enter. Control Shift tilde. So now this is correct. So if I change this to 1020, it better be 2 hours. That is a beautiful formula. Now Control Z. Now we want to take a closer look at this cool formula. I'm going to click in the cell with the formula, go up to Formulas tab, over to Formula Auditing, and we want to click Evaluate Formula. This dialog box will step through the formula and show us how each part of the formula is calculated. Now, the underline means it's going to evaluate that. So it's going to look at the first time, which is 2 a.m. Then it's going to evaluate 8 a.m., do the subtraction. It gets the minus. Now, we have to have our parentheses around that comparative operator because we want to force that to calculate before the math operator. So when I click Evaluate, it's going to ask the question, is 2 a.m. less than 8 p.m.? So when I evaluate, of course, that's true. Click again. Now it's going to add true to minus 0.76. And this is the point where that true is converted to a 1. And it's converted to 1 because of the math operation. So I evaluate, and sure enough, 1 plus minus 0.76 is 0.23. That's the underlying time value. So when we evaluate and multiply by 24, there's 5.75. Now, if instead the end value is 10 p.m., we're going to watch what happens. I'm going to evaluate. That first part is not negative. Evaluate the question, is the later time less than the start time? It comes out false. So when we add false to 0.083, if it's 0, it's not going to change the number. And of course, it doesn't. Times 24, and we get our 2. Now, there's actually 2 other formulas. One involves the if function. And you use the if function when you want one of 2 things in the cell. Now, we run this logical test, and guess what? It either comes out true or false. Well, if it comes out true, that means it's the night shift. So the if function says, hey, what do you want to put in the cell if it's true? We'll put in the formula that adds 1. If it comes out false, we'll put in the formula that doesn't add 1. This formula using the mod function is definitely the most efficient, but it's pretty tricky. If you want to learn the logic behind that formula, that video right there will teach you. But the good news is we have multiple ways. I kind of like this one because it's either adding 1 or 0, which is exactly what I need. Now we have one last time calculation. We want to go over to Formula 8. Now in this example, we have an end and a start, and we're doing the subtraction. If I enter this, I get 517. But our goal for this particular calculation is to always round to the nearest 5 minutes. That means this should be rounded to 515. If we change this to 140, then this should be 520. Now, the rounding that we're going to do is not standard rounding. We're not rounding to a particular position. We want to round to the multiple 5 minutes. And notice this formula input is a time value, 00 hours colon 05 minutes. So because it's a multiple and not a position, F2, we don't use round, we use MROUND. There's the number, comma, and the multiple, well, it's 5 minutes. Close parentheses, Control Enter, and it correctly gets 15 minutes. If I change this to 40, Enter, now it's correctly going to 20 minutes. Control Z. Now F2, once we have the correctly rounded time value, then we multiply by 24. Control Enter, Control Shift tilde. They worked 5.25 hours. Now MROUND is not used for just time values. It's often used in pricing. Here's the prices, and we want to round to the nearest 25 cents and $5. So correctly, 43 pennies rounds up to 50 cents. If I change this to, let's say, 29 pennies, it better go to 25 cents. And it does. Control Z. Now the next task is on date fields using worksheet formulas. And then on PQ dates using Power Query formulas, we want to create date attribute fields. Now we already saw how to add date attribute fields to a date table in the data model using DAX formulas. Now anytime you have big data, that's how you have to do it. Also, if you're just using the data model because it's convenient, you got to use a date table with relationships. But sometimes in the Excel worksheet, we have a small data set. Control down arrow. This is only about 150 records. Control home. And although the pivot table can easily create year, month, and even a standard quarter, there are many date attributes that the grouping feature in a pivot table can't create, like fiscal quarter and fiscal year. Fiscal quarter and fiscal year are just different accounting quarters and months where the end of the year date does not end on December 31st. Fiscal periods are very common in accounting. All right, so we have a small data set. And here in the year column, F2, that's the same function as over in DAX. Tab F2, that's the same function as in DAX. Tab F2, the day function is the same in DAX. Tab. But for month, whereas in DAX we used format, over here it's called text. It does exactly the same thing. You select the date, comma, and then in double quotes, MMM. End double quotes, close parentheses. And when I hit Tab, of course, this is an Excel table, so the formula copies down automatically. For day, text, comma, in double quotes, DDD. Tab. Now quarter, we have to think carefully. If we have a standard quarter, 1, 2, and 3 months are quarter 1. 4, 5, and 6 are quarter 2. So the way we do this is we say, hey, I'm looking at the month column, and I want to divide by 3. When I enter, and I probably should sort this to make it easier to understand, so I'm going to say oldest to newest. There's the earliest dates. Everything from month 1 to 3 will be 1 or less. All the months 4, 5, and 6 will be 2 to some number just bigger than 1. So the way we create quarter is to use round up. And this works like round, except for we can say to always round up, comma, we want to the integer, which as we saw earlier for rounding money would be to the dollar. So we use a 0 and enter. And there's the correct quarter. The quarter label, I'm just going to, in double quotes, put Q, the ampersand to join this text to the relative cell reference in this table, and enter. That's something we could use in the row or column or filter area for a pivot table. Now, fiscal quarter, for us, we're going to assume that March 31st marks the end of the year. That means on this date, the company starts to create their year-end reports. And the original idea behind fiscal quarters is that a company picks the slowest time of the year to create all their reports. So if we have April 1st, that means we're looking at month. And month 1, 2, and 3, we really want that to be the fourth quarter from the last fiscal year. So we want in this cell one of two things. So we're going to use the if function. I'm going to say is the month. And I'm going to hard code this in because this is something that doesn't change for the company. If the month is less than 4, that means it's 1, 2, or 3. Well, what do we want? Comma. The value, if true, is it's no longer month 1, 2, or 3. It's quarter 4. So we put a 4. And then comma. Otherwise, the value, if false, is whatever the standard quarter is minus 1. So for 1, it won't be touched because that'll be 4. But notice quarter 2 minus 1 is quarter 1. So that's our formula. And this formula is the same in DAX. And it's almost exactly the same in Power Query also. So enter. So when we're doing fiscal year, the same logical test is month less than 4. That means it's month 1, 2, or 3. Now we know that's quarter 4, but that's for the previous year. So really for quarter 4, it would be 2022 minus 1. So that's what we'll do. And if we're past the third month, then we simply want whatever the current year is. Close parentheses and enter. Now we can take fiscal year and quarter, create a label that we can use in our pivot table reports. Equals whatever the fiscal quarter is, and a Q in double quotes, and then join it to a third thing, whatever the fiscal quarter number is. And when I hit enter, oh, I see that it's not correct. So I click in the top cell, F2. I really want, instead of just Q, I want a space, dash, space. And now when I enter, the formula automatically copies down. And there's our fiscal period label. Now, our goal is ultimately to create whatever reports we want. But let's select any one cell, Alt-NVT, existing sheet. I'm going to put it in P8. Click OK. Now look at all these fields. Remember when we're doing a data model, we could have hidden all the fields we don't want. But our report is simple. Fiscal quarter label, and then I'm going to check sales. Right-click, number formatting. Oh, standard pivot tables, we always have to manually add the number formatting. Of course, we don't have to do that with DAX. Click OK. I'm going to rename this, and I probably should have named it here. I'm going to call it Fiscal Period and enter. Now, what's important about this example for you and your careers as an analyst is to remember, yes, we have to mark each row either in an actual fact table when we have a small data set or over in the data model with a date table. We need to mark each row with whatever date attribute we want so we can create the correct reports. Now, the worksheet formulas here are very similar to DAX, but in Power Query, they're very different. So let's go over to PQ dates. Now, one of the great things about using Power Query in this example is we can bring this Excel table up into the Power Query editor, create all of the necessary date attribute fields. But in the Power Query editor, we can also remove all the ones we don't want. And then when we load the data, we don't have to load it back to the worksheet. We can load it directly to the pivot table. Also, it's quite amazing how easy it is to create these Power Query formulas. So I select a single cell, data, get and transform, and there it is, from table or range. It opens the Power Query editor. There's our table. I'm going to immediately rename this F sales with date attributes and enter. Now, the change data type, we actually want to keep that till the end. So I'm going to X this out. And here's how easy it is in Power Query. We can select the date column. And to add a column, our first task is to add a month number. So column selected. And this is how amazing it is in Power Query. There's all sorts of options. It will automatically, with just a click, create all these date attributes. So we want month, month, and this will give us month number. Up in the formula bar, table.addColumn is the name of the function. It's acting on the previous step. There's the name, and there's the Power Query function. Date.month, please calculate that from the date. Now we go back and select date because we want now month, name of month. And there's table.addColumn and date.month name. Date selected. Now we go up to date and we want quarter, quarter of a year. There's the date.quarter of a year function. Now we want, and we have to scroll back over, year. And there's date.year. And now we want to add fiscal month. Well, there's no option in date, but we're still going to use add column. Remember, we used the if function. Here in Power Query, we have a conditional column calculation. So I'm going to click, and it will actually build the if formula for us. This is going to be fiscal month. That's the name of the new column. If the standard quarter equals 1, then please put a 4. Otherwise, and notice that we don't have commas in value if true, value if false. It's just then, else. And here we want to change this to not a value like we typed in, but to a column. And then I select the column quarter. And this won't work, but watch what we're going to do. When we click OK, up in the formula bar, we see, well, it's still table.addColumn. But for each row, here's our if formula. If quarter equals 1, then 4. Else, well, that's not right. So we're going to edit the M code. Up in the formula bar, I do -1 and enter. And we can see the if function in Power Query and the Excel worksheet are very similar. Now, wait a second. This is not fiscal month. This is going to be fiscal quarter. So again, I'm editing the M code. Fiscal quarter and enter. That's much better. Now we need fiscal year, add conditional column. Now, this is going to be fiscal year. And if the column quarter equals 1, then, well, we need to select a column. And this is where we need year -1, but we can't do that till we click OK. Otherwise, please just put in the year. Now, I'm immediately going to click OK. Go up to the formula bar, expand. If quarter equals 1, then year -1, and enter. The last column we need is the fiscal period. So we'll select year, and watch this. I'm going to hold Control, click fiscal quarter, and now we go back up to add column, and there it is, merge columns. Now we selected year first, so the separator will be space, dash, space, capital Q, space, click OK. And there's our beautiful merged column. Well, guess what? That's not right. I love Power Query. I can just come up to the formula bar because I forgot to name it, fiscal period, and enter. Now, the only columns we're going to need, well, we're going to need date, sales rep, sales, hold shift, click sales. Now I'm going to hold Control, Control month name, fiscal quarter, fiscal year, and fiscal period. Right-click, remove other columns. Now we have what we want, and the last step is to make sure we have the right data types. This is definitely going to be date. Click sales rep, hold Control, month name, scrolling over, fiscal quarter, right-click, change type, and I want to change all of those to text. Sales is the only one that gets decimal. And then we have whole number. Fiscal quarter, fiscal year, right-click, data type, whole number. Now we have all of our steps. We can go up to Home, Close and Load to. I do not want it as a table. I want it as a pivot table report. Existing, I'm going to put it right here. Click OK. And now I can simply drag fiscal period down to rows, sales down to values. This is not a data model pivot table, so we have to add that number formatting every time. I'm going to leave 2 decimals showing. Click OK. Total sales, and enter. our original table is still here. We don't have to add all those date attribute columns because the pivot table has exactly what we need. If we add new records later, of course, we just add them to the bottom and click refresh. All right, that was an epic MECS number 5 video about dates and times. We saw how to use Power Query to add date attribute fields to create our pivot table report. Here we used worksheet formulas, and both for worksheet formulas, DAX, and Power Query, remember, only add attribute fields to a small fact table. Otherwise, put it in the data model and add a date table. And then we learned all about these amazing 12 date and time worksheet formulas. All right, if you like that video, be sure to click that thumbs up, leave a comment, and subscribe, because there's always lots more videos to come from Excel is Fun. All right, we'll see you next video.